I'll kick it off. Thanks everyone for coming in today. My name is Genevieve Simpson. I'm the chair of the Perth branch of the Australian Institute of Energy. Fleda, we're still looking at you now. Sorry, everyone. I'll pin myself there. Hello, everyone. My name is Genevieve. I'm the chair of the Perth branch of the Australian Institute of Energy. Perth is hosting this fantastic webinar today. For those of you who've just come online, we were having a quick chat about the fact that this is a cross Australia event today. So we've got Shahana, who's based out of the ACT, and Matt's from Arena. And then Jennifer is from Victoria and Mal is from New South Wales. So hopefully we've got some attendees from across Australia as well. Before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land on which we meet. I'm going to broadly say that's across Australia today, and we acknowledge their elders, past, present and future. We are having a bumper-to-bumper session today. So we've got two sets of two speakers, one from Bioenergy Australia and Arena, and the other from Frontier Impact Group. Kicking off the presentations from Bioenergy Australia is going to be Shahana McKenzie. She's CEO of Bioenergy Australia, and she's responsible for leading their contribution on matters such as climate science, jobs creation, regional development and energy supply. And Shahana is just going to allow Matt Walden from Arena to pop in just briefly to give us an overview of the bioenergy roadmap that's being produced by Arena. So a great last minute contribution to the agenda. So Shahana is going to tell us a little bit more about Bioenergy Australia, their organisation, what they're doing to support bioenergy, what bioenergy is, and next steps before we go into a bit of a case study from Frontier Impact. Thanks very much, Shahana.
Great, thank you so much, and absolutely delighted to be participating in this today. So I will just share my screen, and apologies that you can't see me, but the internet is not as great as we would like. So hopefully, how does that look, Genevieve?
That looks fantastic.
Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you once again. So Bioenergy Australia is the industry association effectively responsible for Australia's future bioeconomy. We have members right across the sphere, from those that are producing bioenergy, whether it's fuels, clean gas, bioenergy from so heat related, electricity. We have consultancy firms, engineering firms, we have Virgin and Qantas Airlines, we have really, it's an incredible mix of the entire sort of sphere, I suppose, in terms of the bioeconomy. We have researchers, state governments, CSIRO, and we run a number of things that are really the sort of pillars in terms of what we're driving in our agendas. So we run something called the Australian Cleaner Fuels Alliance. We run something called the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand. And we run something called the Renewable Gas Alliance. So through those alliances, we seek to really drive very specific agendas within those spaces. I suppose in terms of what is bioenergy, well, really imagine anything that currently comes from a fossil base being able to be produced from an organic residue or waste stream base. So, you know, in terms of, I suppose, the feedstocks that we're talking about, you can see that we're talking about agricultural feedstocks. We're talking about municipal waste, particularly the organic components of that, wastewater treatment and biosolids, industrial sort of water processing, wood waste and animal residues. There's some key sort of things. But then, I mean, whilst it isn't reflected in the name of our organisation, we also have members who are taking inorganic feedstocks as well and converting those into higher value products as well. So taking things such as end of life and unrecyclable plastics into things such as liquid transport fuels, tyres into liquid transport fuels, and those sorts of things as well. In terms of, I suppose, and the intent very much is to give a high level kind of overview, so not to dive into each of the different types of technology conversion processes that can be utilised, but you can see there combustion, gasification, fermentation, transesterification, pyrolysis and anaerobic digestion are just some of the conversion technologies that we have listed across there. And in taking the feedstocks, utilisation of one of those conversion technologies, we then end up with a range of different products. And I suppose in terms of looking at here in Australia, those that are that would probably be recognised, industrial heat as an example. So a project that recently came online is a project in regional New South Wales. It's a canola processing facility that converted their coal-fired boiler units to biomass boiler units. They were not on the gas pipeline, and so for them, they were paying upwards of close to $30 a gig for their gas because it was having to be bottled. And so converting across to biomass for them took them down to around $6, which is a considerable change for a regional business. Biogas is another one there in terms of biogas, and then the further element in terms of biomethane. So that's really the capture of methane that is being produced across whether it is piggeries or abattoirs or wastewater treatment plants, all of those sorts of facilities that are processing huge amounts of wet waste and water. It's capturing that gas and then utilising through upgrading technology, either that gas then being utilised to produce electricity or for it to go as direct gas into the natural gas pipeline network in Australia. Now that hasn't yet happened, but that's going to be the next big thing in Australia without a doubt. Then looking at, I suppose, in terms of the liquid transport fuels that can be produced and are being produced in Australia. Ethanol, we have 3 ethanol refineries across Australia at the moment, all taking residues or waste streams from other processes. We have a number of biodiesel plants also operating in Australia, and one actually just came online just under 12 months ago, which is fantastic to see. And renewable diesel, which is a new type of diesel, and that has only just been added to the Australian standards, the Australian fuel standards. And renewable diesel, the interesting opportunity with renewable diesel is that it's actually a 100% drop-in diesel. It doesn't require any blending. It is like for like in terms of its ability to operate the same as existing mineral diesel. However, it has significant benefits in terms of reduced particulate matter, sulfur, and emissions profile. Then in terms of, I suppose, the different feedstocks or fuel sources, going into a little bit more detail there, you can see in terms of where the potential opportunity is around the future bioeconomy. Now, one of the things that I didn't talk about in the previous slide was around the bioproducts, biochemicals, bionutraceuticals, bioplastics. Really, as I said earlier on, anything that is currently being produced from a fossil base into the future will be able to be produced from an organic base through a biorefinery process. And we certainly do see that that is the direction that some significant global brands are going in, such as Coca-Cola and others. And I'm sure that many of you have noticed that now when you're buying washing detergent or hand liquid or anything along those lines at the supermarket, that it is now there are bio-based products rather than, and they are plant-based effectively, based products versus fossil. Okay, I suppose in terms of moving on from the what is bioenergy, and you'll certainly dive into that a little bit more in terms of the case study that's going to be shown. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the drivers that are driving the development of Australia's bioeconomy and what's really pushing the agenda. First of all, I suppose the really key one is around the bioenergy roadmap that was announced in November last year, which is a Commonwealth project. and more recently, the technology investment roadmap that will be guiding the Commonwealth direction in terms of emission reduction and technologies to drive that. I'm not going to go into that because Matt is going to give us a little bit of an overview and an update in terms of the bioenergy roadmap. In terms of looking at other, I'm just going to shrink that. Looking at other drivers that are driving the really significant increase in interest and uptake in Australia. The first one there is around decarbonisation of the gas network. So we produce something called Biogas Opportunities for Australia report in partnership with AIE, the CEFC, ARENA and the International Energy Agency and Energy Networks Australia last year. And really the drive on this is around the significant gas pipeline infrastructure owners in Australia are pushing an agenda which is around decarbonisation of the gas network. There has been a significant amount of effort into decarbonisation of the electricity network in Australia, but that same sort of support has not been lent to the other elements such as the transport sector in liquid fuels or gas. And so they are two really significant key areas that are going to be the next kind of frontier around decarbonisation. So as an example, well, a couple of different examples. One is that Copenhagen, they have made a commitment by 2025, they will be 100% biomethane in their gas network. Similarly, France they've actually increased that number now, but 59 sites was how many they had injecting biomethane into their network, with another 297 were on the wait list. In Australia, however, we are still at the moment sitting with 0. But I would hope that within the next 12 to 18 months, that will be a very different figure. As I said earlier, we run something called the Renewable Gas Alliance. We released a joint letter just earlier last month, which was calling for the development of a biomethane market in Australia. And you can see that that letter was signed by the APGA, by the Business Council of Australia, by the major gas pipeline owners, really a significant collection of businesses that are seeking to, to drive the development of this industry. And just recently, I mean, McCain's done it again, I think was the heading that I saw in an email just before. McCain, as an example, announced just a couple of days ago that they are going to be developing a project using solar as one component, but also a biodigester utilising their chip waste in order to generate renewable energy for their projects. Another significant driver in terms of moving into the future in Australia is, as I said, there has not been a focus on reducing emissions across the transport sector as there has been in other sectors. And we've actually seen a 17% increase in emissions through that sector since 2005. In addition to that, Australia is heavily reliant on imported crude and also even refined products. And so looking at, I suppose, the situation into the future, as an example, if we had an E10 mandate that was across the entire country, which is as it operates, say, in the US or over in Europe, you actually fill up your car and ethanol is the octane enhancer. So it's present in every grade of fuel. It isn't one specific fuel. If we were to have something such as that, that would provide an 18% increase in our basic days of fuel security that we hold for the passenger vehicle fleet in itself. In addition to that, as I was saying earlier, with renewable diesel being a 100% drop-in diesel and being able to be produced from end-of-life, non-recyclable plastics and the like, that presents a significant opportunity, and moving into other sectors such as aviation fuels as well. Another significant driver that we've seen over the last sort of 12 months has been a significant shift within the mindset, I suppose, of government but also citizens as well through things such as the War on Waste program and other initiatives, that there is now a focus and a spotlight on waste in Australia that really hasn't been present before. And so we're really, we're able to support the agenda around reducing waste, around diversion of particularly organic wastes that do produce those significant methane components that are currently going into the atmosphere, and utilising those for a higher value product and potentially, you know, if they're going into an anaerobic digester as an example, capturing the gas from that facility, but then also being able to, off the back of that as a byproduct, to have this incredible digestate product, which is a fantastic agricultural fertiliser / enabler to be able to assist with soil, drought resistance, and a range of things. I suppose, you know, I couldn't really, at the moment, if we're talking about domestic drivers, I couldn't ignore COVID and the economy and where things are sitting. And I think, you know, we can safely say that there is a bit of a shift in terms of thinking currently in Australia around us really creating a level of self-sufficiency, a reigniting of domestic manufacturing, a focus on regional areas and regional communities and jobs and transitioning. You know, just one example, I suppose, is the response that the Australian ethanol industry, as well as the distillers across Australia, had to do in the response to COVID, when there was effectively a 40-day shutdown of exports out of China. That there was a significant 600% increase in demand for pharmaceutical grade ethanol in order for hand sanitizers and disinfectants, and that the Australian industry really did respond to that very quickly and was able to pivot businesses in order to, instead of supplying fuel grade at that quantity, to be able to shift and to really be able to provide the pharmaceutical grade or industrial grade to be able to support that. Now, I suppose the scary thing for me in considering that is, if we didn't have the mandate for E10 in New South Wales or in Queensland, it's highly likely we wouldn't have any ethanol being produced domestically in Australia. And so we would have been in an incredibly vulnerable position had that same situation happened with COVID and coinciding with a 40-day shutdown out of China. We would have had no access to ethanol. And I think that in itself has really been a bit of a wake-up call in terms of particularly, you know, the Department of Industry having a bit of an insight into what are the strategic industries for the future that we need to make sure we can maintain. As I said earlier, another key focus for us is around jobs. But basically, Australia's bioeconomy could be providing significant regional jobs across Australia. A CEFC and ARENA report on biofuels potential across Australia last year that was released showed that there's the potential for up to 250,000 jobs in regional Australia through biofuels. And that for us, just that in itself, you know, if we're not talking about the other areas, that in itself is a significant opportunity in terms of driving regional investment and regional jobs and transitioning regional Australia. The next one is around global drivers, including aviation and marine. So both the aviation sector and the marine sector have set a 50% reduction in emissions by 2050. Now, there is already currently 5 approved pathways for biojet fuel, and it is operating every day across the world. Not as much right now, but it is, and it has operated out of Australia. So there was a trial that was held out of Brisbane Airport with Virgin Australia last year. And as I said, we run the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Alliance of Australia and New Zealand, which is around really driving the development of a bioeconomy in Australia for that aviation fuel. Those fuels can be blended up to 50%. So in terms of the quantity of fuel that we're talking about, it's not a 2% or a 3%. This is a substantial opportunity here in terms of fuels. It is also, in terms of, I suppose, looking at that opportunity around the percentage of what that could be providing. There are organisations such as Qantas, who last year announced a $50 million commitment to the development of the industry here in Australia, as well as many others across the world. So, and we have a number of members here in Australia doing that. And as an example, Fulcrum is a project in the US that's taking municipal solid waste and converting that into aviation fuel. So there's some really interesting pathways that are being developed in that space. Bioenergy globally, where do we sit? Fifth from the bottom, sixth from the bottom. So we sit down here. We're a long way behind, but I suppose the really important benefit there is that it means we have a significant opportunity in terms of being able to grow. We are the low-hanging fruit considered in a global context for a lot of the significant global developers. I'm going to skip through that, and because I'm running out of time, but we released something called the KPMG State of the Nation report in 2018, and that showed just a little bit of a breakdown in terms of the current bioenergy projects that are operating. There has been a significant increase since that point in time, and our plan is to release an updated report next year. So thank you, and that is me.
Thanks very much, Shahana. So do you know whether Matt's going to pop on now? Have you heard from him?
Is he not on? You haven't seen him?
I haven't seen him pop on, but maybe we can work with that in the background, and Matt might be able to give us a bit of an overview of the bioenergy roadmap with ARENA once he's available, after we get to hear from the Frontier Impact Group. So heading up the Frontier Impact Group for today is Jennifer Lauber-Patterson, who established the Frontier Impact Group to drive the business and economic benefits of environmentally sustainable investments and strategies. And Jennifer today is also joined by Mal Campbell, who's going to be talking on the technical and financial side of the bioenergy project they're working on. Thanks very much, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. I'm in lockdown in Melbourne at the moment. And the reason I've got this background is it's where I'd actually like to be. I think it'll be a long time before we get to go to some tropical beach somewhere overseas. But the positive is getting lots of work done in lockdown. It is a real pleasure to be speaking to you today on the Renewable Fuels project for Collie. There's a lot of fantastic benefits that are going to be provided for the local community, and this is something we'll share with you shortly. At Frontier Impact Group, our focus is really very much about impact projects that have an impact on the environment, but also grow regional opportunities and also jobs, and we think this project will do that. So if we move to the next slide, these are the benefits that we believe that it will provide Collie. Next slide, Mel. If it will move, wonderful. One of the aspects that was touched on before is fuel security. As we know, since 2012, we haven't met our fuel security targets in Australia. So I think gaining more fuel security on a regional basis is really important. And this is something that this project will be able to provide. Other real key benefits are the utilisation of waste biomass resources for the highest value for the local community, particularly with the focus currently on a circular economy. And also renewable fuels in order to help with businesses reduce their footprint. And I'm really encouraged with all the organisations I've heard that are starting to commit to reduction in carbon, and this can definitely help companies, particularly when they use fuel for transportation. We're a net producer of water production, which is great. And the project also will create other new businesses and job opportunities from the byproducts that are actually created. And Mel, later on, will talk to you about the opportunities from biochar, from graphene, from wood vinegar. These are all outputs from the production process in addition to the renewable fuels. And jobs, this is fantastic. We have 36 plant jobs that will be created and we'll be giving priority to people in the Collie area, construction jobs, 25, and other indirect jobs, 90, but that's conservative. We think it'll be much larger than that. With the project, what we love about it, it's something that is modular and it can be easily replicable. So we can actually put another plant next to it and again create more jobs and double the amount of fuel that's on that site. So that's one of the positives around the flexibility of the plant. So moving on to the next slide. This is a little bit about the technology. The technology is commercially proven to produce a drop-in diesel fuel. There are two key components to this fuel. One is the production of syngas from biomass processing. And one of the outcomes of that syngas process is the biochar that is collected through an extraction system. And there's about 15% approximately biochar that's created from that process and about 85% in syngas. But what is different to what we've seen in Australia before, because we have got other high temperature pyrolysis systems that convert biomass to syngas, but the conversion process through a distillation process to convert it into renewable fuel, into a drop-in diesel, is one of the aspects of it that's quite unique. So once this is produced, it can go into a truck or a car, and there's no sort of changes that need to be made to that vehicle. So that's a really big advantage. Just a few highlights, and I won't go into some of the ones I've already mentioned, but 18 million litres of renewable diesel it will initially produce. And as we've mentioned, there's one that we could add another 18 million tonnes subject to biomass availability on that site. 8,300 tonnes of high quality biochar and graphene, which Mel will speak further about, and 6.5 million litres of wood vinegar that can be very beneficial in using in agriculture in WA. There's an utilisation of 55,000 bone tonne equivalent tonnes per annum of biomass. So that's what's needed, and that's relatively small for some of the bigger plants that have like a Fisher trough type technology. But I think this is an advantage because a key aspect of the cost is how the distance in terms of supplying the organic waste streams. And so the closer you can be to the site, the better. So the more smaller it is, the closer you can be to where it needs to be. It's a net production of water rather than consumption of water. Large economic benefits, including direct employment of 35 to 40 FTE staff, as we've mentioned. It's low emissions, and it can be even carbon neutral or carbon negative, which is fantastic. Capital investment of around $100 to $110 million. We're getting work done by an EPC contractor at the moment that's doing more modelling to get more precise numbers for us. And we're estimating the return on capital at this stage to be 23%. So it's also economic. Performance insurance, we're looking at an insurance company that has seen our technology that we're using and can also provide a performance guarantee on that, which is gold when you're starting to deal with banks. Next slide. What I just wanted to move on to quickly is some of the the project status. One comment I'd really like to make is how wonderful it's been working with the people in Collie. Wendy Purdon, she's been managing it's called a timber hub in the area of Collie, and she's just been so supportive, and it's great to be supporting her larger project and being part of her timber hub. Also the WA government, Kim Brooksbank and many others, and also the Forestry Commission, they've been absolutely amazing. And we are looking forward to one day being allowed to be let into WA and being able to visit you. The other aspect that was a bit challenging for us, we're going to organise a virtual a tour in the US, but it's now going to be a virtual tour. But the positive of that is there'll be more people to be able to participate. So we'll have someone that will be walking around showing us all the bits and pieces and how the plant actually works, which I think will be a lot of fun and something very different. Site assessment, we've now got 3 sites and we've got about 20 different factors that we're considering on those sites, but we're doing a very detailed due diligence, and Mel and Sugi and our team have been doing an incredibly good job around that. The biomass supply, one benefit with our project is we can pay commercial rates. And that's really critical because quite often to get these projects up, people want to be paid for the resource or only pay a very small amount. If you want alignment, I think with your suppliers, it's important to be able to pay a price that's reasonable for them. We're also considering energy crops, but we won't need to do that in the first project. Biochar is a significant component of the revenue stream, and we've actually got a letter of intent in order to secure that supply, which is really important. Financing, we've spoken to a number of financiers. We had some support in terms of getting this grant from the WA government, from financiers. So we're very confident about our ability to get funding. EPC contractor, we've got a global recognised EPC contractor who knows the technology in the US. So that's just made it a little bit easier in terms of progressing with the work that they need to do. And the diesel accreditation. It has been accredited to fuel standards in the US and in the EU. And it's also been reviewed in New Zealand, because New Zealand have stricter sulphur guidelines than the US and Europe, or definitely the US, and they're the same as our guidelines. So given we know that they meet the New Zealand guidelines, we're very comfortable that they will meet our guidelines, and that's a process that we're going through at the moment. And then there's the EPA council approvals, which we're starting on that at the moment, but we're very confident because of the low environmental impacts of this plant. This is one of the superior positive outcomes of it, is the low environmental impact and the ability to get to potentially carbon negative fuel, depending on the design of the plant, and Mel will give you a little bit more on that. Renewable diesel contract, that's where we're talking to a number of potential buyers, and we can produce the fuel we estimate at around 80 cents a litre at this stage, which we think is very competitive to normal diesel when you look at the long-term diesel price. So we'd love it if you were interested in some renewable diesel, but if you're a local, obviously you'll have an advantage. And wood vinegar, a local market for this is identified. It's not a significant revenue for the project, but we think the value it can have to the region is what we're excited about. Financial model, we've got a really detailed financial model with sensitivities, so we understand you know, the costing side and the revenues, and have done a lot of sensitivity analysis around that. So it is close to ready for investment. And grants, we've had some discussions with ARENA, and we are submitting a proposal which we think will get in place this week, which is pretty exciting. Now, what I'd like to do is pass you on to my amazing colleague, Mel, and he'll talk to you a bit more detail around the technology, but also about some of the co-products that are generated from the process, and they're some of the most exciting parts of the project as well. So over to you, Mel.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll just carry on, and thanks so much for Shahana for setting the scene for a lot of the information that we've been able to share with you, and also Jennifer for giving me a very good lead into this. So I'm going to go through some fairly boring stuff. I'm not the most exciting presenter, but the two ladies have done a wonderful job in front of me. So I'll give you some facts and figures and some numbers, and for those people who are interested in those types of elements. Just in terms of the technology, that's an overlay of a 80 million litre per annum plant of renewable diesel. It consists of 4 modules. So while Jennifer said that you can actually replicate a plant next door and double the capacity, we can actually set it up to add 1 module, 2 modules, 3 modules, however many modules. We could have done a 1-module plant, which would be significantly cheaper when we did our first project, but we decided to do a 4-module plant to get a reasonable economies of scale on the first project. So that being very modular and very scalable has a lot of advantages in terms of locating and sizing the plant to the available biomass resource. So that's just a general layout. The site itself, that's an area of about 2 hectares, that layout, and the site we're looking at in terms of processing, we're looking for probably 5 to 10 hectares. Depends how much on storage biomass, how much on-site storage of biomass that we need, and depends how the biomass is delivered. So, we'll be putting chip into the biomass into the pyrolysis units, wood chip, and we may process the wood chip on site. We may process it off site. So we're still working through some of those logistics with the sites and with various parties in southwest and western Australia. Renewable diesel, already gone through that, so I can skip that slide quite quickly. Shannon mentioned about 80 cents per litre we've done in our modelling. People keep asking me what's the levelised cost of energy of the plant, and it really depends on how much we're paying for our biomass, how much we are getting for our other products, because we've got quite valuable co-products, which I'll talk about in a moment, which mean that we're not just relying on renewable diesel, so we don't have to get our full revenue stream to support the plant from renewable diesel, because we're also getting significant revenue from other products. So that differentiates us, and also we've included a reasonable high cost in terms of the cost for our biomass to make sure that we know that we can secure that biomass or produce energy crops at numbers that mean that the biomass feedstock is sustainable for the long term. And many of you have been involved in the biodiesel industry over a long period of time would know that there's been significant number of issues and failures of projects just because they couldn't secure long-term economic cost of feedstock. So the major byproduct is biochar, and many of you will be familiar with biochar in its own right, and the advantages down the left-hand side of the screen there, there's a number of advantages for biochar. The distinction in this particular product is that with the right sort of woody feedstock, biomass feedstock, we can produce biochar, which has got a significant quantity of graphene in it. And I'll talk about graphene in a moment, but up to 70–75% graphene component. And with that in mind, because of that biochar quality, we've got a project that's got a letter of intent for a long-term fixed biochar purchase contract at a very good price. That market's only going to grow, as I'll explain to you shortly. Graphene, for those who aren't familiar, is basically a single atomic layer of carbon. It's traditionally, I don't talk about traditionally, but currently the main way in which it's produced is to mine graphite. And in mining graphite, there's extra refining done on that graphite to then produce graphene. Now, graphene, pure graphene in itself, or 99.99% pure graphene, costs between $2 a gram and $8 a gram. And while I'd like to get, given that we've got 70% graphene in our biochar, it'd be nice to get 70% of that price. We've got a reasonable conservative estimate in terms of that biochar value, even based on the contract we've got from that international buyer. We've modelled a lower biochar price than that. The graphene's got all those qualities shown in the left-hand column, which make it, it's the next super material. And for people who are familiar with it, some of the applications include in high-strength building materials. Now, there's been some research done where they've actually mixed a mixture of 75% pure graphene from one of our pyrolysis units, and combined that with 99% pure graphene, and the mix was about 5% to 95%. And the combined strength enhancing of those two materials was higher than the individual enhancing of the individual material. So there's some synergetic, which they hasn't been able to explain yet, relationship between that graphene and the pure graphene, our graphene and the pure graphene. And that increases the tensile strength of concrete by 4 to 5 times with a 4% input of that graphene product. And even the graphene that we're talking about at a low cost, a relatively low cost graphene, with the mix of 75% concentration, still has a significant advantage in strengthening concrete and also providing additional properties for asphalt. For pure graphene and for high quality and probably high concentrations, not necessarily pure. Applications such as batteries, many of you might be familiar with graphene batteries, probably the next generation of batteries. In electronics, because of its superconductivity, the ability to use graphene in electronics, and also in superfine filtration. It can be used for filtration purposes. The other product is wood vinegar. None of you might be familiar with this. It's a byproduct of burning wood. We don't necessarily have to produce wood vinegar. We could produce a grey water and dispose of that. But from our perspective, we've got the ability to produce wood vinegar at a very cost-effective rate. The quantities that we're producing will probably swamp the world market for wood vinegar. In fact, that's definitely the Australian market. So we've got a very conservatively low value on that. A price, I don't know about value, but we've got a low price on that in our financial modelling. In fact, our model still works without the sale of wood vinegar, but we want to make it as environmentally sound as we can as a project. So it's got a huge value as a byproduct to assist in fertilising. It's not a fertiliser in its own right, but it actually will assist in the uptake of fertilisers, and a number of the other benefits are there. We'll also be producing from the 3 megalitres of water that the plant produces. We'll be making that potable water. So we're going to make it a very environmentally sound outcome. And these are the next steps, basically community engagement and communication on the projects, part of which is today's session. Finalise the site. We've got 3 sites. We're progressing discussions with EPA and Council. We've got an EPC contractor putting together some designs and costings for the Australian situation. We've been working on budget costs based on US prices. So we're basically going to the stage where we're paying an EPC contractor to firm up our numbers. We're looking to negotiate long-term fuel supply agreements, and we're also looking to potential new business opportunities for users of biochar, graphene and wood vinegar, so that we can use them in Australia as value add in Australia, rather than have to sell them overseas and get other people to value add. We're looking to finalise our feasibility and financial resources at the end of this year, with a view to being construction in mid next year. So that's our project. Thank you.
Thanks very much, team. That was fantastic. I really, I feel like I know so much more about the bioenergy industry in Australia. And I think it's been a while since Australian Institute of Energy has hosted an event on bioenergy, and it's great to see how far the industry has come since last time we hosted everyone. We do have quite a few questions popping up. Shahana has actively been answering some of them throughout, so some of them are now kind of semi-conversations, but I think that's a good opportunity for us to hand over to Shahana and put a bit more meat on the bones on some of these answers. A reminder to people, we've still got a little bit of time, so if you've got a burning question, please pop it in the Q&A box, and there are some little thumbprints there that you can prioritise projects up as well. So the first question I've got is from Bodhi. Regarding the decarbonisation of the gas network, why is it better to decarbonise the gas network rather than continue to decarbonise electricity while concurrently pushing for full electrification? Really good question.
Yeah, so I suppose my response to that is there's a few different reasons. I think the first answer that I would provide is really for us to achieve what we need to be achieving around our Paris commitments and decarbonisation globally, it's going to take a patchwork quilt of different technologies and outputs. And there is a really strong need for gas in Australia, particularly around industrial heat, you know, even to the point of, which is I suppose, you know, would you consider this as a significant point, but you know, consumer research has shown significantly that people prefer to cook with gas than electricity. And so I suppose from our perspective on that front, there is a need for gas on that side. I think the other point is that, you know, gas as part of that patchwork quilt can provide a stabilising element to a renewables kind of grid. And if we're looking at that in the sense of green gas, so not a fossil-based gas, then, from our perspective, we see this as a significant opportunity to actually be reducing existing emissions out of the atmosphere. As an example, in New South Wales alone, if we were to capture the gas that is currently being emitted from abattoirs, piggeries, wastewater treatment plants and the like, just across New South Wales, if we were to capture that methane, it would provide enough biomethane to supply all domestic gas use for New South Wales. So in looking at it in the sense of the emissions are already there, they're already going into the atmosphere. And if we were actually capturing that gas and using that gas to burn it, it's 25 times better than it just being released into the atmosphere in the first place. So I suppose in terms of the arguments around full electrification, stabilisation of the grid, intermittency, looking at all of those different things, from our perspective, we actually see that the future energy mix in Australia is going to require so many different elements in order for it to work. And we need to be creating a system that is going to do that. I don't know if Jennifer or Mal have any further comments, or if they agree with me.
No, very supportive of what you had to say, and I think you were very articulate in that explanation, so well done.
I agree. I think that was a fantastic response. And something that you did touch on there and in your presentation as well, and there's been a couple of questions about, is the idea of negative carbon emissions. And, something that we're seeing out of the IPCC now is that just getting to carbon neutral isn't going to be enough in the future. Shahana and Jennifer and Mal, can you provide any more context and background around the idea of carbon negative and what that includes as part of the process?
Mel, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, in terms of the numbers we put in our particular presentation, carbon negative was in relation to the production of diesel fuel production. So it's not, as the question rightly says, one of the questions says, it excludes emissions from the end user combustion. At the end of the day, you're still producing a renewable diesel that will be carbon negative compared to a petroleum diesel. And that was based on a Canadian study. In fact, it'd be even more carbon neutral or carbon negative in the Australian case, because we haven't factored in having to ship the crude from overseas to get it to Australia and then distribute it right around Australia. By having local production facilities, we can reduce transport costs all around. So from that perspective, that's what that includes. It's a comparison of production of renewable diesel compared to the production of and delivery of petroleum diesel.
Excellent. Shahana, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just having a skim over the questions there. And in relation to, I suppose, the Drax power plant, which I think was one of the ones that was specifically referenced in that, Drax, as well as, I would say I visited a power plant in Utrecht last year, I think it was, which was operating on 100% coal. It was actually not funny, but to be standing there actually at the power plant when there was a barge of Australian coal being offloaded onto the site, it was quite interesting to watch that. But they have committed, this particular power plant has committed to reducing its energy, its coal intake within its power plant by 75%. And they're doing that as a combination of sawmill residue pellets, and they're actually doing a range of gas pellets, pilots out of Brazil. And so, and particularly, I suppose, in terms of Drax's ambition, they're now operating, I think it's at 80% of their power lines is now, the lines within their electricity plants are now operating with biomass versus coal. That was a significant increase in the 2018-19 year. And their ambition is to be carbon negative through a combination of BECCS, really. And so I think, look, in Australia, it isn't an area that we have moved into in significant kind of focus. It certainly is, and I would agree that that carbon neutral isn't going to get us there, and that we really do need to be looking at solutions that are going to be, you know, taking us as far, you know, as far as we possibly can. So it is an area that we do need to look at in Australia in terms of how we can be exploring that further, but it isn't a current focus in terms of the work that we're doing at Bioenergy Australia.
Thanks very much for that. I've got a question directed at Frontier Group. I think I kind of agree with this question, noticing how many interacting components you have to kind of line up as part of the process goes. I imagine you've got some terrifying looking Gantt charts. But Abdul has asked, how did you start your project? And from the start, were there difficulties faced in terms of sourcing funding?
The funding is always the difficult part, particularly what I do find in Australia, particularly technology that hasn't been commercialised before, is really difficult. And I admire anyone that is looking at a new technology or something, even at an R&D or pilot scale, because there's such a long timeline. And in Australia, we don't have a really, I think, strong risk appetite for supporting commercials, technologies that haven't been proven to be commercial in Australia. So yeah, it is tough. One of the reasons I did leave banking was because I saw the challenges that technology providers had, and I felt there was a need to bridge that gap between project developers and financiers, because there's a big expectation in the financial modelling, and there is a lot of things that need to be lined up, particularly with the new technology, where even with pyrolysis hadn't had a good track record early on, which made it even more challenging. But it is about having to, it's not going to happen overnight, but it is lining up. You know, EPA are usually one of the more challenging items, so they should, because we want them to do their job well. The supply side has been, you know, a real challenging part. And if you can't get a 10-year plus agreement, well, you're not going to get the financing. And that has been challenging in this sector. And then the sale price, you know, being able to secure that. And with this technology, it is very, very competitive. So we're fortunate in terms of the sales price we can get. But it's also because we've been able to secure a price for the biochar and the graphene to make it all work. So it has taken us many years actually to get to this stage of the project. But we think it'll be worthwhile, because we do think that the economic opportunity for Australia is huge. The potential it can provide for fuel security, just like other bioenergy technologies that are being developed. And, you know, I was talking to Mel a couple of days ago saying, look, I think there's 50 projects that could be developed across Australia and making regional communities resilient. We're doing a project in Gippsland at the moment, looking at potential biohubs there. We think there could be 3 of them just there. And if you had 50, that's around 1 billion tonnes of renewable fuel in Australia. And that's just one technology, not all the technology that, you know, Bioenergy Australia are across. So that is the potential we have, and that is true fuel security. It's fuel we've got here if there is a potential disaster. And as was highlighted earlier, these things do happen. And I do think we need to have better risk management around fuel security.
Thank you, fantastic response there. And I think a really good point to lead into to talk about the patchwork of opportunities that Shahana was referring to. And I think the final question, which I'll take, is kind of related to that, and something I think that we're interested in WA as well, is the main challenges that might be faced in terms of the regulatory framework to enable the injection of these gases into the gas networks.
Yeah, sure. I can quickly speak to that, and Genevieve, Matt's on the call too, so we can quickly get him to do a quick little overview on the roadmap.
That would be fantastic.
I'm sure people would be interested. Really quickly, I suppose, in terms of regulatory barriers and the like, that's a piece of work that we're going through. However, I mean, biomethane is effectively a natural gas. And so its ability to be able to be upgraded to meet the natural gas specification is currently taking place at a global level. And so the difference between biomethane as opposed to, say, hydrogen, as an example, hydrogen, if you're blending into the network over 10%, then it's going to cause issues regarding appliances and the like, whereas biomethane effectively could be a 100% replacement within the network. So at the moment, we're working with the gas pipeline owners, we're working with state governments, we're working with the networks themselves in order to really establish what are the significant sort of barriers that we might see for those first projects. And, you know, hopefully ARENA will, in the near future, fund a biomethane injection project into the network. And usually what happens in that space when ARENA, you know, sort of funds one of those first front-running projects, a lot of lessons are learnt in that process in order to then enable those afterwards to be able to, you know, gain insights through that process. So, yes.
Absolutely, and a great opportunity then to hand over to Matt if you'd like to talk about what ARENA's doing in this space.
Sure. Hi Genevieve, and thank you to yourself, Jennifer and Mel, for the opportunity to just briefly come and touch on the Bioenergy roadmap that we're very much buried in at the moment. And for those that aren't familiar, the Minister responsible for ARENA, Angus Taylor, requested ARENA look into developing a bioenergy roadmap, and since that time we've instigated a fairly formal process under which the consultation process has just recently closed. And I think very proud to say that the level of submission exceeded expectations by a significant multiple than what was originally anticipated. I think written submissions exceeded 160 documents from individuals or organisations with some level of interest in the bioenergy sector. In terms of consultation sessions, we've met with a range of people in the industry. We've held a number of forums. I think the count of people that attended our forums has exceeded 160 or 170 people, again, all with very varying interests in the sector, whether it be feedstock, technology, end use, or financiers, or even just people or persons or entities that have some loose affiliation with the sector. So the response we've had to the process has been absolutely phenomenal. And where we're at the moment is we're undertaking some quite extensive economic modelling across the range of opportunities that bioenergy represents. And as that modelling concludes and the findings from the consultation process is distilled, we will then produce, will be the first iteration of the Bioenergy roadmap that will be released to market within the next couple of months, that is highly integrated or intertwined with the Commonwealth Government's technology roadmap process as well. And I expect the document to highlight a number of near-term opportunity areas that are there for the taking, that subject to various actions and activities by industry, as well as governments and regulators, etc., that there is a pathway to unlocking these opportunities, a number of which are here and now, and a number of which are probably more longer dated in terms of the need to progress the technology readiness of some of these underlying technologies, but otherwise outline the role that bioenergy can play, whether it be from, and Shahana mentioned, energy security, and that can take a number of forms, whether it be through regional jobs, which I think is a very important factor, or investment value. So how do we bring more dollars into this space to drive the sector further and compound that growth? So we're very excited. We've got a very strong background both within our organisation and the consulting group that's assisting us, and thanks to Shahana and her organisation, that's been instrumental in ensuring that we're getting all the industry connections that we need. And as I said, from there we'll have some finalised positions within the next couple of months that we will then take far and wide within Australia to articulate and sell the benefits of the sector.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that overview, Matt. And I think I speak on behalf of AIE Perth that we'd love to hear more about it once you've concluded the process. And a final big shout out to any of the Bioenergy Australia guests. So we did make this opportunity, this webinar, open to the Bioenergy Australia memberships as well. So a very fantastic hello to all of you who might be out there. I understand many of you are probably popping off now to go to other meetings, but in advance of that, I'd just like to give a bit of a shout out to the young energy professionals who are having their first in-person event tonight following the coronavirus. So there might still be some tickets available if you head to the Young Energy Professionals Perth Eventbrite page. The Women in Energy for Perth are also having an event at 5 p.m. on the 12th of August in partnership with Women in Economics, titled The Role of Energy Investment in the Economic Recovery of COVID-19. Over East as well, if you're interested, from one of the Eastern States branches, in Sydney on July the 23rd, they're having an event around extreme weather events and the impacts on operational and planning implications. And also tomorrow, Melbourne is doing an event on energy technology, planning under heat stress. A huge thank you to all of our guests today from Bioenergy Australia, Frontier Impact, and at the very end there, Arena, for coming and talking to all of our guests. I think it's been a really active discussion. We've had some great questions, and I don't know about you, but I have learned a whole lot more about bioenergy in Australia. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.